short to long-term trends in the light of the ongoing economic crisis ignited by the pandemic. Among the many economic ramifications generated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the odds are being endured by the labor market of Bangladesh. If we see the employment trend of Bangladesh, there are three sectors those contributed heavily in ensuring a momentum in employment generation. Those three are the foreign labor market opportunities, the manufacturing sector led by the RMG, and the urban informal sector. Now we are fearing a heavy employment loss in the manufacturing sector. We are observing a reverse migration from urban to rural. We worry that we might see a reverse migration of the international expatriates once the regular flight resumes. There are issues with fall in real wages as well. All these have long-term effects on poverty, inequality, and other sustainable development agenda goals. These also have implications on the overarching issues like the demographic dividend. Against this backdrop, we believe that today's discussion is a very timely one. In our today's session, the session is being chaired by Professor Shamsul Alam, Member, Senior Secretary, General Economics Division, Bangladesh Planning Commission. We have Mr. Tuomo Poutiainen, Country Director of ILO Bangladesh, as a special guest of the session. We also have distinguished panelists, Dr. Ahsan H. Mansur, Executive Director, Policy Research Institute of Bangladesh, Dr. Imran Matin, Executive Director of BRAC Institute of Governance and Development, and Dr. Selim Raihan, Executive Director of SANEM and Professor of Economics at the University of Dhaka. Our today's keynote paper will be presented by Dr. Sayema Haque Bidisha, Research Director of SANEM and Professor of Economics, University of Dhaka. We are thankful to our chair of the session, special guests, and our distinguished panelists to make the time to join this Shongzog again amidst their busy schedule. At the very beginning of the session, I would request the chair, special guests, and the distinguished panelists to keep their video on. All other participants are requested to keep their video off and microphone muted. We planned out today's session in the following manner. After the welcome remarks from the chair, we will hear the keynote presentation from Dr. Bidisha. After the presentation, we'll take the remarks from the panelists. Each of the panelists will have around 8 to 10 minutes for their remarks. After the remarks from the panelists, we'll have another 25 to 30 minutes for the open discussion. After the open discussion, we'll have remarks from our special guest and the chair. There's a minor change in the agenda. We will hear from the special guest at the end of the open discussion rather than after the keynote paper presentation that was mentioned in our previously shared agenda. Since in our today's session, we have many participants from abroad, we would kindly request the panelists to respond to the keynote paper in English. However, during the open discussion, the participants can ask the panelists or the keynote paper, keynote presenter questions in Bangla or English. The panelists can respond to the questions during the open discussion in Bangla or English. Our today's Shongzog is being live on Zoom and on the Facebook page of SANEM. Participants from SANEM Facebook page can also ask questions to the panelists and the distinguished guests. Kindly post your questions in the comment section of the Facebook page. We'll read out your questions during the open discussion session. Without any further ado, now I'd like to request Professor Shamsul Alam for his opening remarks. I would like to request Professor Alam to kindly contain the opening remarks in 5 minutes, since we'll come back to hear your valuable insights at the later part of the session. Professor Shamsul Alam, over to you.
And thank you very much, Mahtab, and welcome you all, and very good morning to everyone. And I thank the SANEM for arranging this timely meeting, timely discourse on labor employment situation, what's going on now. Before that, I can say you, before COVID-19, our total employment has been falling during the period of 7th five-year plan, if I say the truth. Our target was to create 1 crore 29 lakh, if I say 1.29 million jobs in the economy. Actually, we could create, as of our final assessment, 9.5 million jobs. That is quite far short of the target we set in the 7th five-year plan. That is the truth. Of course, our labor productivity has increased, and particularly in agriculture and manufacturing, our labor productivity has been increasing in I should say, in a very comfortable manner. One is 6% at that rate, other one maybe 9% rate in the manufacturing sector. Though in the service sector, actually our labor employment has not much created, and in this period, elasticity of employment elasticity of growth employment has been falling in every area. Particularly, it is negative in agriculture. So that was the situation while we was completing the 5-year course. But before 3 months of completion, 5-year plan, we faced the COVID situation, which was quite unprecedented, unexpected, but that has fallen in our economy. Certainly, that will change the entire gamut of the employment situation in a new situation, obviously. So today's discussion is very much pertinent at this stage. While we are preparing our 8th 5-year plan, we'll take lessons of our success or failure in the 7th 5-year plan. And now with COVID situation, we need to know quantitatively actually where we are and which way we are moving ahead. So that's very much pertinent at this stage. So I thank SANEM for arranging this very timely discussion, as I was saying at the start. So thank you very much, and I will be listening carefully Dr. Sayema Haque Bidisha and other distinguished panelists, which way we are moving with employment, what would be the situation with elasticity, do we get new elasticity estimates right now, or how would be employment situation by sectors, if possible, to understand sectoral trends in the employment situation. So having said these initial remarks, I leave the microphone to Mahtab again. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opening remarks. Now I would like to request Professor Sayema Haque Bidisha, Research Director of SANEM and Professor of Economics at the University of Dhaka, to present the keynote paper. I would request Dr. Bidisha to kindly contain the presentation in 20 minutes. Dr. Bidisha, over to you. Dr. Bidisha. I think there are some technical glitches or internet problem at the Dr. Bidisha's end. So let's wait for 30 seconds or a minute. Shoaib, can you reach Dr. Bidisha now? I mean, over phone?
Sure.
Yes. We just learned that there's some connection problem at Dr. Bidisha's end. We beg your pardon. Just bear with us for another couple of minutes. We are trying to connect with her as soon as possible. Just give us 2 or 3 minutes.
Actually, I have requested Dr. Bidisha to reconnect the Zoom. She was having some problem, but I think she will actually join in a minute or so. So thank you, and I'm extremely sorry for this technical glitch. I think Dr. Bidisha, you have joined now.
Yes.
Okay, so
Extremely sorry.
Okay. No, it's okay. So please, you can proceed with your presentation.
I have to make a co-host.
Can you share your presentation now?
Yes, yes. Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Extremely sorry for the disruption, as we know that about our technical issue.
Bidisha, you can actually put it on the kind of full screen mode or presentation mode.
Okay.
Clicking on the end, that button, you can actually make it as a presentation one. Mahtab, can you please guide?
Madam, what is requesting is to put it into slideshow mode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Distinguished panelists, respected chair and special guest. Very good morning. Sorry for the delay. I will try to keep within time frame. Today's SANEM Shongzog is about COVID-19 and the challenges of labor market in Bangladesh. We all know that at this moment, it is an extremely important topic to talk about. So we have done some research and we are trying to provide you the thoughts that we have in our mind. Now, in the research team, along with me and Dr. Selim Raihan, there are three young economists who has worked tremendously to do the empirical estimations. First of all, let me talk about the pre-COVID challenges. We all know that there has been quite a lot of issues and challenges that we had in our in the labor market in Bangladesh. The unemployment rate, there has been a mismatch in skill demand and skill supply. There has been a gender issue as well. Automation and fourth industrial revolution, that has been a key constraint and key challenges that we have in our mind and we have ahead. And there is an issue of decent job and worker safety as well. Finally, there is the issue of informality, especially in the context of COVID. It is often argued that this is one of the most crucial challenges that is in fact making the whole scenario more challenging and more problematic for us. Now, in the context of COVID, we have seen that some of the challenges that we already have, that has been aggravated, and we have also confronted ourselves in terms of several other challenges, several newer challenges, like now, why, in terms of the challenges, the degree and depth of the crisis that we have during COVID, that depends firstly of the length of the crisis and the initiatives that is taken by the government. In terms of that, area, what we can say that post-COVID challenges, what are the avenues of post-COVID challenges that we have to understand, and then we have to understand that what is the implication. Now, in terms of the avenues of post-COVID challenges, the reasons behind, one is the domestic demand, fall in the domestic demand. then the fall in the global demand, then there has been a great influx of labor supply, the return migrants are coming, then there has been some restriction in the productive activity down, so that restriction is almost over. But there is also slow pace of private investment and issues of business confidence. So in terms of this background, what we have seen that there can be several ways that employment issue has been affected. One can be, there can be temporary job loss, temporary shutdown of the businesses. There can be not job loss, but reduction in profit, reduction in salary. There can be permanent job loss, permanent destruction of business, depending on the time frame. Then people may change their job, that can happen as well. And because of the new normal activities, we may expect that there will be increase in the production cost. There can be other effect as well, because one of the effect that Mahtab has already mentioned about the issue of reverse migration, and also there has been a loss in the capital base that has been talked about in recent times. Now, against this backdrop, what we are trying to see that in terms of two issues, like two key indicators, one is the income and poverty and another is the employability. In terms of these two indicators, we wanted to see that what has been the implication to have some idea. Now, if we see that in terms of poverty income, what we have found that if we use the household income expenditure survey and if we put a general income shock, what we have seen that we have several new poor people. And in terms of the categories of day labor, in terms of the categories of employees, we have seen that there is the highest increase in the proportion of people who may fall down due to COVID-19 below the poverty line. Now, if we go a little bit further and if we go into the aggregate detail of different occupation group, then we find that some occupation group like skill agriculture, crafts and trade, plant and machinery, these categories, people of these categories, they have the greater probability to fall down below the poverty line and they have the more probability to be new poor. Now, these people are actually day laborer, ready-made garments worker, household help, tailors, different type of people who are working in the construction side. So these are the people who are most vulnerable in terms of the income and poverty when we are thinking about the post-COVID implication. Now, there is another issue when we are talking about income and poverty. There is also the issue of the employability. Now, we have also done another exercise in terms of the employability, and what we have seen that we have used basically economic census of Bangladesh, and we used some district level data, and with the district level data what we have found that with the district level data we ran some regression, some estimation. I'm not going into detail for the methodology part, but we have found some scenarios and we have made some estimation on some of the scenarios. Basically, the scenarios are showing in the district level the number of cottage, small, micro, small, medium and large industries that we have. If we think that due to COVID, some of the industries are distracted and the production, they are shut down, then what will be the impact of the employability and in the district? And from that district, if you make the average and if we sum it up, then we get some idea about the national average. Now, obviously, there can be, depending on the depth of the crisis, depending on the scenario, and obviously there can be an argument in terms of the methodology. But I think what we think that this is a scenario, that this scenario is showing from different cases of the total loss in employment. Like, for example, if we look at the scenario 4, then we find that here we are what we see that this is a moderate case, I will say. 20% loss in cottage, 20% loss in micro, 10%, 15% loss in small, 10% loss in medium, and 5% loss in large industries. If that is the case, then we find that around 6 million people, the reduction is around 6 million people. So sort of 6 million people loses their job. Now, if you go to the another extreme, like 50% reduction or 50% shutdown of the micro cottage, micro, 25, 10 and 10, then we find the scenario increases extremely, and we find that around 12.5 million jobs are lost. So obviously, depending on the depth of the crisis and the length of the scenario, things can differ, but this is what we think that this gives sort of a picture of the overall employment loss that might have happened during the COVID-19 period. So we have seen income issue, we have seen the employability issue. Now, what we should do, or what is the way to go forward? Now, we have done some exercises in this regard. Again, I'm not trying to go into detail, but we followed some simple methodology, and we tried to see that what could be the projected labor force growth in 2020 and 2021, and what might be the employment, or what might be the absorptive capacity of the economy in 2020 and 2021. And that difference gives an indication of the additional job that we need in order to get all of the labor absorbed in the economy. If that is the case, then obviously we have actually considered 3 employment elasticity and 3 scenarios. I'm talking about the moderate income employment elasticity scenario, and what we find that if the employment elasticity scenario increases and if the GDP growth rate increases, that the gap reduces. So this is some sort of indication that gives we need 2 issues. We need actually 2 things in order to get this labor absorbed. Like one is like we need to have higher growth, we need to have higher private investment. But the question remains, like when we are having a depressed global growth, when we see that infection rate is still quite high, whether we will be able to achieve that private investment that is desired, and whether we will able to achieve that GDP growth which is required for absorbing that excess amount of labor that we will be having in the market. And the secondly is the labor productivity of, but if we see that the employment elasticity is sort of not improving in recent years, in fact, it is falling what we have seen. So if that is the case, that is also another challenge that we have with us in order to get the labor absorbed in the economy. Now, this is sort of an idea like what might be the 2 macro avenues from which we can get the labor absorbed in the economy. Now, if we go a little bit further, then I know that I will not have much time, so I will just go very quickly into this slide. This is another issue that we are often discussing. It is about the female labor force participation. Basically, with lockdown and excess stress from the school closure and all of the childcare availability of the childcare facilities, we have found that the unpaid domestic burden has increased. So here we are showing that if the unpaid domestic work burden that increases, that will have a very strong negative impact on the female labor force participants. So this is also another thing, that another challenge that we have to keep it in mind as well. Now, when we have the challenges, the government has definitely done to restore the employment status in different way, and there has been a number of key incentive packages. I'm not going into the detail, but I think the 2 or 3 key incentive packages which require proper implementation is like the $200 billion taka package, which is targeted for the SMEs, and 300 billion taka which is for the basically for the large industry. And in addition to that, definitely there has been some packages for the RMGs, some packages for the agriculture sector as well. But these incentive packages has to be implemented in most efficient manner. Now, so if we see that what are the key challenges, if we sum up all of the exercises that we have done, we have to generate employment basically through two avenues. One is the wage employment and the second is the self-employment. Now, for the wage employment, the key challenge is to stimulate private investment. And the second issue is the self-employment. And when we are talking about self-employment, we need to encourage small-scale employment. So in order to encourage small-scale employment, the key issue is the complex conditionality that we have. So given that, what can be the recommendation and what should be the areas we need to consider? So here, the key recommendation, I don't want to spend too much of time because the honorable panelists already have the presentation with them. One is the most important, I think, is we need to relax the conditionality and the interest rate on micro and small enterprises. Now the 20,000 crore Taka incentive package that we have, that is obviously that is something which is very positive thought from the part of the government, but the conditionality and the interest rate that we have, that is still quite high, especially when we are talking about the micro and the small enterprises. Then we can obviously think about the whether how we can channel the farm, maybe through the microcredit agencies, maybe through some different type of negotiation rather than the official formal banking channel. We can
Dr. Bidisha, I would like to request you to wrap it up in 5 minutes,
sure,
if that's fine.
Sure. Then the issue is like we can think about the youth startup fund that we had in previous budget, but we don't have it in this budget. That can be a very important way to employment generation. Tax rebates at different stages of production and import of raw materials, that can be another way to stimulate the employment, especially in the SMEs. Then another very key challenge that we have is like the informal employment. How we can identify the informal employment. The government needs to think about some innovative strategies in order to identify the informal, those people who are in the informal employment. And there can be some self-claim mechanism. There can be the sector-specific representative that they can be involved. The NGOs can be involved. Then we need to think about, obviously, from broader perspective, diversification of export. We have been talking about these issues for several years, but now I think it is a time that we need to focus our attention on diversification of the export, and we need to think about the newer opportunities that we may have, like IT, nursing, leather technology, chemicals, pharmaceutical, all of these things. So that is one thing that we need to think. And another issue is like what we were talking about, the issue of return migrants, or the return migrants from abroad and also from urban area to the rural area. And if we think about them, then we need to think about we need to have a long-term strategy, and the long-term strategy should be the decentralization strategy and district-wise employment. That is something that we need to think about. And we need to also bring the online platforms, and where we can link the urban consumers to the rural people who are producing the small and medium enterprises producers and the agriculture products. The general recommendation is obviously one very important issue is to have a proper database. Secondly is we need to have better educated and better skilled people, especially when we have to think about the fourth industrial revolution challenges that we have ahead of us. So we need to increase our budgetary allocation in the social sector. For female employment, because we have seen the burden of unpaid care work, so the issues to facilitate the daycare centers, these issues has to be emphasized. And finally, I think the most important thing is monitoring and evaluation of the incentive packages that should be carried out to have proper implementation and proper of the incentive packages that the government has already provided. So this is what we have from us at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bidisha, for your excellent presentation. Now I'd like to request Dr. Fazlul Haque Bidisha, Chairman of SANEM and Professor of Economics at the University of Dhaka, to give some remarks on this issue. Dr. Fazlul Haque Bidisha.
Okay, thank you, Bidisha, for your presentation, and also the chair of this today's session, Professor Dr. Shamsul Alam, panelist, and the ILO representative in Bangladesh. So I think you have covered most of the point, but I will not go through the presentation, but I may have some question to both the ILO representative in Bangladesh as well as Professor Shamsul Alam, because government has been looking into different and proposing, has proposed a lot of incentives. I think some issues are important. I think what we found is that I think most of these stimulus package or fiscal, responses that are basically has been designed in terms of through the monetary policy or monetary channels. But we all know this in this kind of crisis, the fiscal policy is much more effective, and we found very little fiscal response in that way. So this is one of the questions that we are all having, that why government is not actually considering most robust fiscal responses rather than going through monetary channels, and which we know that the timeliness of that will be critical. I mean, we hear that some of the loans are not disbursed properly, or it takes a lot of time to disburse. I think time is the essence here. So that would be a question to Professor Shamsul Alam, that why we can't do a fiscal response properly. And a lot of countries are doing much more aggressive fiscal response. If you look at India, they are doing almost universal transfer of 500 rupee for every household, and they have come up with some estimation also. So that would be one question to Professor Shamsul Alam. My question to ILO chief is that I know that this is a difficult issue in the context of developing country, but I think the data set that we use for labor force survey and other, it seems like that we still have very low unemployment, like only 4% unemployment. I mean, this seems, I think we need to come out of that methodology. Is there any discussion development in terms of, can we have a better, robust data set which you can track actually where unemployment, where this unemployment, what kind of unemployment? Because I think this kind of data set is not helping us in terms of tracking unemployment situation properly. I think one point that I would like to request Bidisha to add and Selim to add is that we have covered most of the points, but I think one point you have missed possibly is the social protection, the labor market and social protection issues that should come up in terms of what kind of social protection schemes or programs needs to be think through. Like we can think through like the unemployment insurance issues, the other issues that are the ILO and other are promoting. So I think we should have a fresh look into that one. Look at our social protection system and what kind of social protection strategies are in place and what we can do. With that, I will like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for your kind remarks. Now we are going for our scheduled panel discussion. As I mentioned before, there is a minor change in the agenda. Now we are directly going for the panel discussion, and we'll come back to our honorable special guest for his oral remarks at the end of the open discussion. We have 3 distinguished panelists today. Each of the panelists will have 8 to 10 minutes for their remarks on the presentation and the subject matter. We'll come back to the panelists again during the question answer session. First, I would like to request Dr. Ahsan H. Mansur, Executive Director of Policy Research Institute of Bangladesh, for his remarks. Dr. Mansur, to you, and I would like to request you to maintain it in 8 to 10 minutes. Dr. Mansur.
Thank you. Let me first congratulate Bidisha and Selim for doing an excellent job, because labor market issues are not very easy to handle in Bangladesh, in part or largely because of deficiencies of data and the lack of high frequency data that one would expect automatically in the Western countries, but you don't get it here. So that's a major challenge for us. Secondly, I will now focus on the discussions, and the discussions is very much in line with what I have been telling in other forums as well, is that Bangladesh has, at the moment, three challenges. The first one is the containment of the disease itself, and without that, coming out of this problem of unemployment or poverty, or at the same time loss of output and GDP slowdown or negative growth, those things will be impossible. We'll not be getting back to what you call pre-2019 or pre-COVID output level in the near term, unless we address the infection level, spread of the infection in the country. Second one is the one you are touching, is the unemployment and livelihood together. I couple them together, because this unemployment issue, I would like to see, wishfully probably, that it's a transitional issue. As the disease will disappear, the economy will start growing. Most people, in my view, will get back their job today or tomorrow. It's a matter of how soon we get out of really move to the post-COVID situation. We are now in COVID situation. What you have described here as post-COVID is actually during the COVID time. But when you really move out of the post-COVID situation, that's when the unemployment will disappear, in my view. The unemployment means not the real unemployment. Underlying unemployment is always there, and that problem persists. That's what Professor Alam was referring to, that the seventh plan did not generate the level of employment that we had wished for, hoped for. So that underlying problem is there. But the temporary bulge in unemployment and associated with that, the poverty increase and the livelihood issue, that will probably disappear probably by middle of next year, in my view, as the economy comes out of this deep recession as it is going through now. Third thing is, how do we support the recovery of the economy from the April and May situation? And obviously, the government plan has been outlined very nicely in the stimulus package, which Bozulhak Khondokar rightly said that it's bank driven, it's monetary policy driven, it's not fiscally driven, but there is a fiscal component of 3,000 or 5,000 crore taka in that. Other than that, it is a bank driven model. So that part is also important, and how much progress we make, how soon we can make the progress, that will also help ease the pain or accelerate the recovery to some extent at least. Now, I see that in Bidisha's table, there are 4 scenarios that are presented. One is the high case, the other one is the low case. And I think, in my view, all the scenarios are relevant in the real world. That means the high case, or maybe the even higher case, was the April, when we really had the lowest point in terms of job losses and sufferings. And then slowly, as the economy has opened up, but the disease has not gone, we are seeing like a Nike shoe, slow upward movement. But it is not going to be, it's not going to be pre-COVID level anytime soon, unless we have the disease level contained. So what we are going to see is a suboptimal level that we will reach, even with the support of this incentive package or stimulus package, as well as other measures that the government may have taken. So issue is that all 4 scenarios are in a way relevant, and it's how we move from one to another that will depend on how the government and the private sector responds to the stimulus package and moves the economy towards the normal trend. And if that process is helped by the containment of the infection level of the disease, then of course it will lead to the desired outcome sooner. My main concern is that investment is not going to be as stated in the budget document from 12.5% to 25% over in this fiscal year. Private sector is not going to invest until the situation is much more clearer. It is very much a function of that. Public sector should be investing, But there we have the problem of resource mobilization. We know that Finance Division and Planning Ministry is now sitting together to cut down their non-essential projects, etc., etc. Is essentially a function of resource base of the government. And as we have been mentioning that the revenue situation, we have been mentioning it not now, because we've been mentioning it last 5 years, that the revenue situation is going to become acute and it will suffocate the government. The point has come now. It is suffocating the government activities. The ADP is not going to be implemented to the extent one would like to see. One would have liked to see it more than what it was in the budget, but that did not happen. And even whatever is there is being cut now. So because of resource constraint. Here, I would also emphasize that we should also keep our focus on FDI, foreign direct investment, because a lot of in the in the COVID situation, a lot of countries have realized that we are over dependent on China, so there is a migration away from China, and how we can capture part of that. That should be part of our recovery strategy as well as post-recovery strategy to attract some of those firms into Bangladesh, because we need that investment, technology, skill, etc., as part of our overall product mix and investment mix in the country. So we have problem on all three fronts of FDI, private sector investments and public sector investments, and we need to work on those fronts very strongly. Finally, I'll just say a little bit of the stimulus package. I think the money given, this 30,000 crore for the large ones, is going to go away very fast. It will not take much time. It's already, a lot of banks already started dispersing. The money that was allocated for RMG workers has already been exhausted. Now they have requested to get it part of the 30,000 crore to be used by the RMG sector for paying the workers. Government has basically agreed to that as well. So that will also be used up. Issue is that SME sector, not much has happened. Very few disbursement has taken place, maybe in few hundred, not even few hundred crore perhaps, out of the 20,000 crore. So there is a serious problem there. And that's the discussion is going on between the government and the banks. The issue is multiple front. One is there is a cap of 9%, which is hurting the banking system anyway, but particularly makes lending to SMEs and micro SMEs almost impossible. So the risk sharing issue came up. The risk sharing issue is being discussed now between Bangladesh Bank and the ministry and the banks. Issue is that unless there is a proper risk sharing arrangement, which allows the banks to at least, if not make money, at least break even after allowing for significant NPL that will come out in that process. Because any loss, right now the way the program was designed is any loss is banks. And banks doesn't get any return for that. And that is a kind of, well, I would say, asymmetric kind of design that is not going to work. So we have to redesign the micro and small enterprise issues much more seriously and quickly, because we need to channel funds to that sector. Finally, I would say that we also need more resources. This is the amount of resources that has been committed will not be sufficient to pull us out of this rut. So we will probably require much more resources, but let's at least disburse the available resources. They're going to be finished very soon, except for the SME. SME, once the policy is corrected and the risk sharing is appropriate, return issue, 9%, is the cap going to stay there? As long as it stays there, the government has to take much more risk than it is now. If the cap is allowed to be more flexible, the risk sharing burden on the part of the public sector may diminish with that. So these are basic fundamental trade-offs that needs to be addressed and need to be part of the package. I will finally request again, going back from the starting point, that any analysis on the labor front is very difficult. And that's what makes me very reluctant to talk about labor issues in Bangladesh, because you don't know where it is happening, and the outdated data that you get is really very useful for policy purpose. Since our ILO representative here and Shamsul Alam is also here, I would request both of them to really make an effort to go for high frequency employment data. Even if it is not a census, make it a sample survey based, but give us some indication which way the labor market is going. Without knowing that, without knowing the unemployment situation, intervention policies, social safety net programs, all kinds of things cannot be designed properly. So we really need some high frequency employment statistics from Planning Ministry and then BBS. Please work on it for us, on our behalf and for the interest of the country as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for continuing within the stipulated time. Thank you for your excellent remarks on the subject issue. Now I would like to request Dr. Imran Matin, Executive Director of BRAC Institute of Governance and Development, for his remarks. Dr. Matin, at this round, I would request you to continue the remarks in 8 to 10 minutes. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I think Ahsan Mansur has laid out a few areas that I think, I was also going to talk about, especially the data need and the need for high frequency data, but also I think something that I perhaps want to add to that is the importance of also new forms of data. Right? So I think there is a lot more labor market movement that is happening in the digital, in the ICT-enabled digital sector, in the digital economy, which is really picking up and which creates its own data through the big data process. And I think that also needs to be, that type of upgrading of our labor collection, data collection process has to be there so that we can actually also make use of, what is known as big data, especially in the digital sector, because that is also another big area of the labor market that I think we actually don't really have a lot of insights on. And it'd be good to really fill that gap. Now going back to my specific comments that I wanted to make, and I would like to stick to, kind of areas that primarily BIGD has been working on. We've been working on, obviously, poverty, labor market issues, but not so much in terms of model building and prediction, but more in terms of figuring out what really is happening and trying to collect primary data to be able to understand what really is happening. And I just want to draw a few insights from that. And I think, it sort of ties in very much to, again, what Ahsan was saying. So one is, so as you know, we did a survey in partnership with PPRC in April, in the in the immediate aftermath of the COVID crisis. And then we repeated that, similar survey, but adding a few other dimensions we sort of finished that survey by beginning of this month, and we're analyzing the data, and I'll draw on a few of those insights. So one is clearly, I think, very much to your modeling, that sort of the headcount poverty rate has more or less doubled. I mean, that's not sort of something that your model shows, and I think our direct rapid survey also suggests that. So, from 22%, headcount poverty has gone above 45%. So, sort of more or less doubled, and I think that's what you basically see. So, I think in your 25% general income shock model. So, I think that sort of corresponds, and I think that's really kind of good news in some ways. Repeat survey, I think we are seeing something, and I just want to talk about that because it sort of, I think, supports a lot of things that Ahsan was saying. So one is, what we are seeing is there's a sharp V. There's a sharp V and we are doing a lot more heterogeneity analysis, but overall there's a sharp V, but the sharp V is about 40% of the February 2020. That's what we're using as the benchmark. From February 2020, right now, income levels are around 40 to 50%. So there's a sharp V, but it goes up to 40 to 50%, right? And that's important. And what happens to the remaining 50% and how long that is going to trail forward, and for which sectors, how it is going to behave, is the critical question. I don't think we can model around it. I think we just need to really monitor this very, very carefully. Now, this is not a model world. This is a model of the uncertain world where I think we need much more rapid monitoring oriented approach here. So, but we get some inklings in terms of what may actually happen. So we asked people about perceptions about their confidence level in terms of where their income may actually end up in the next 3 months. And it's really interesting that over 70% of people just think that it is just uncertain, income will decline, or they just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that is really, really important. So I think what you really see is yes, the economy is opening up, but there's the infection is not under control, and everybody believes that infection is not under control. I'll talk about that. In this kind of a scenario where the economy is opening up, we do see that the income is not really picking up. It's a sharp V up to 40%, but the future outlook for most people is a relatively uncertain one. And that uncertainty is going to affect confidence, investors' confidence, is going to affect labor market behavior, because the uncertainty is not only around the income, the uncertainty also is around the infection management. So the cost of infection management is something we need to really bring in the whole labor market analysis. That what happens when the health sector is uncertain, when your health seeking behavior is totally uncertain, when you don't know how you're going to get the kind of treatment that you're supposed to get. That type of health sector uncertainty will spill over in the labor market behavior and choices as well. So this interdependence is going to be really, really important. I mean, we cannot think about the labor market separately without thinking about what's happening in the health sector. And I think that interdependence is really critical to really get into our thought process, into our modeling, and into our analytical mindset. Because I think this old way of thinking about things in a sectoral silos doesn't work in this particular crisis context. And I think that's really, really important. I mentioned that that people are extremely clear in terms of why we are where we are in terms of opening up the economy. Only less than 10% people thought that opening up of the economy in the way it has been done is a unequivocal good idea. Predominantly, people felt that there was no other option. And I think this is also very, very important, right? I think general people absolutely understand that this has been a sort of a totally between devil and the deep blue sea. And this is perhaps, the only, no other option. There's absolutely no other option, given that no other support services are triggering in on time, because our systems are totally broken. So the only way, despite the pledges at the high level in terms of all types of support that people will be getting, because it's not forthcoming, the only option there is actually is to open up the economy. But people are also very clear that this opening up of the economy is really in a very uncertain, uncontained infection control environment, which is severely constrains the recovery. And I think that dynamic is extremely important to really understand as we think about the labor market and employment. I just have two other kind of very quick points to make, and then I'll basically stop. One is, so the second point I want to make is really around thinking about, of course, fiscal versus monetary. We need more fiscal, and we need to sharpen our monetary instruments, especially along how we're going to implement it. And I think again, Ahsan Mansur, I talked about the MSME sector there. But I think it's also really important also to think about the design dimensions of any of these instruments much more carefully, and especially with a much stronger, incentive design. So how, I'm not sure that we are being clever enough in terms of, how we are designing these instruments in a way that generate the most incentive compatible outcomes. And can we use past theory to really do it? And again, I'm coming back to that whole health and economic interface. Can we use past theory to really think about what type of instruments will lead to what type of incentives? Ultimately, we want to create certain types of incentives for economic recovery. But in this kind of health economics interacting world where the health containment hasn't really happened, do we really understand, what type of design would create what type of incentives, behavioral incentives that ultimately leads to the desired outcome that we really want? And this is an open question. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's enough we know that we could just use. And the question is, are we using those insights and principles in terms of our intervention design? But then there may be new insights that we need to understand in terms of how this thing is happening. I'll just make one more point and I'll finish. The last point I want to make is really around, I think this was, I think Dr. Bidisha talked about towards the end in terms of the importance of M&E, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really one of the things that's really important in this context, and I think Professor Bostur talked about the time is of the essence. Absolutely. I think time is of the essence, but so is course correction. Course correction is also of the essence. Humility is also of the essence, that we don't really know many of the things we don't know. So course correction becomes really important. So how can we actually design an M&E that can really help us course correct and help decision makers course correct? And there's a technical aspect to it, and data and all that is going to be really important, but there's a cultural aspect to it. And if government is going to be a main driver of a lot of these recovery programs, along with private sector and NGOs, but government being the main driver, then I think openness to course correction is so important. How can we create a learning state that can really be open to course correction so that we can actually have that type of M&E, because we are really in the realm of a lot of uncertainties, and we should have the humility to know that there are a lot of dynamics that we don't fully understand, and we need to sharpen our own intellectual lens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Imran Matin, for continuing within 10 minutes. Thank you for excellent discussion on the issue. Now I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Selim Raihan, Executive Director of SANEM and Professor of Economics, University of Dhaka. Sir, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mahtab, and I must thank Professor Shamsul Alam to chair this important discussion. And I also thank from SANEM two distinguished panelists and the special guest of today's event. I also thank all the participants. So you have heard from Dr. Bidisha the presentation, which is a joint work of SANEM team. But I'd like to add or probably elaborate few issues, which may appear to be a little bit repetitive, but I'll try to make it more focused. So we all know that the employment generation has been a problem for the past decade. And we have seen that the employment elasticity of growth has been declining and remained low. And I refer to the work we did with the Planning Commission, and there's the employment study, and we actually surveyed quite a number of firms and households, and then the analysis shows that employment elasticity is actually declining. If we look at the sector allocation of labor, employment in agriculture declined but remained high. Manufacturing employment grew with ready-made garments, but in recent years it is also falling. So these are all taken from the official statistics. But we are also seeing that the service sector jobs are mostly informal and low paid. Also, there is a very high degree of informality in the labor market. We have seen low job creation even in the informal sector in recent years. So that all really prompted us to talk about, say that kind of jobless growth. Are we actually experiencing jobless growth? So furthermore, working conditions and lack of decent jobs are important issues in the labor market. We have seen growing rural labor migration and international migration, which are important contributors to poverty reduction and growth in Bangladesh. So COVID-19 has put additional pressure on the labor market. Due to shutdown or slowdown of economic activities, many have lost their jobs. Many have shifted to inferior jobs. We see that the major hit on employment is in the urban area. I can mention two of SANEM's ongoing works. One is Garments Workers Diary, which actually we collect on a weekly basis with MFO and Gates Foundation. And this survey is actually showing some deeper impacts on the garment workers because of this crisis. And actually we are sharing this result of this survey in a weekly blog as well as press releases. And I would like to share this with you in future at a larger scale. We have also taken an initiative in collaboration with Asia Foundation on Business Confidence Index by surveying firms nationwide. So we have just started the survey. and we'll share with you the findings of this survey on 8th August. And I invite you all. Actually, there's going to be a very interesting analysis where we actually surveyed a representative survey, I would say, at the farm level, and try to understand their business confidence. The preliminary findings are showing some grave impacts on employment and wages. So in the rural area, the crisis actually due to the COVID-19 crisis, what we have seen, the crop sector may not be that hit, but non-crop agriculture and non-farm employment are badly hit. All these are resulting in a rise in poverty overall, and we have seen that the badly hit is actually mostly hit is in the urban areas. So all these are resulting in a rise in poverty, which have already been discussed, inequality, and reverse migration from urban to rural areas. The reverse migration will add additional pressure on the rural labor market, as non-crop and non-farm economic activities and related employment opportunities are limited in the rural areas. Unless major economic reforms take place in the rural areas in terms of infrastructural and financing supports, many of these returning people will not be in a position to do something productive in the rural area. So that can also enhance or escalate social tensions in the rural areas. So the situation may get worsened with the likely influx of returning migrants from overseas. So in the short to medium term, my understanding is that the future looks bleak. The depressing effects on employment and wages may continue. Many self-employed in the MSME sector lost their capital, which can never be recovered. Also, wage employment is suffering as economic activities are suppressed. Therefore, the revival of economic activities is extremely critical to counter this situation. People are trying to cope up with this situation mostly on their own, but the adjustment cost is appearing to be very high, even at the household level, including the way households allocate resources on food and non-essential non-food, especially I'm talking about education and health. There are incidences where households actually spending low on education, taking out their children from this education and placing them in the work. So I think these things need to be, these are the kind of adjustment costs may be very high and which may not be recovered in the medium to longer term. So what has been the government policy? So my understanding is that the government policy response related to the current labor market challenges has been weak and inadequate. One major challenge is the lack of information, lack of up-to-date data on the labor market, which has been very rightly mentioned by Dr. Bozlo Khandokar, Dr. Ahsan Mansur, and Dr. Imran Matin as well. So these jobless people are not included in most of the social safety net programs. Also, the existing social safety net programs are unable to address these growing challenges. So it is also true that the fiscal space of the government is not conducive for expanding the social safety net programs. However, under the current crisis, the government should go for an enlarged deficit budget to spend high on social safety net programs in general and labor market related programs in particular. Now, if we look at the management, so I want to talk on the management of the COVID-19 crisis, and this primarily involves three aspects: management of health hazard, management of the economic crisis, and management of social crisis, especially poverty and job loss related social crisis. So we are observing, I would really like to emphasize here that we are observing major institutional challenges in all these three aspects. There's a lack of coordination in the crisis management, and that is clearly observed in the failure in lockdown measures. It's an example of this lack of coordination. We are seeing corruption, clientelism, problem in targeting, problem in priorities, and kind of weak state capacity. All these are visible in managing these three crises. So there is a need for improvement in these three areas. Otherwise, it will be extremely difficult to actually come back to the normal economic track or normal track as pointed out by other panelists. So finally, I would suggest three things. First, the government should form a labor and employment commission, which will assess the current unprecedented situation. I'm quite sure Bangladesh never ever experienced this kind of situation in the past. So which will assess the current unprecedented situation and suggest necessary measures. The Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics should be entrusted to collect data and information on the current situation on a regular basis. So I fully agree with Dr. Ahsan Mansur and Dr. Imran Matin about this high frequency data. And unless and until we have a better understanding of the situation, it is very difficult to actually take necessary measures. My second suggestion is that introduce new social safety net programs targeting the labor market. In this context, the employment guarantee scheme for the next 6 months for vulnerable people can be seriously considered. The modalities can be sorted out, and we can talk about the modalities of this employment guarantee scheme, but I think this is something is very important. My third and final point is that the revival of economic activities is a must, which is closely linked to the management of the ongoing health and economic crisis. High priority should be attached to solve the institutional challenges in the health sector, which we are observing very much every day, and implementation of the stimulus package, which is already, which has been very rightly pointed out by other panelists, that how affected industries, especially the small and medium scale industries, they are facing challenges in accessing the benefit of the stimulus package. I would like to stop here and thank all the panelists and chair for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selim Raihan, sir, for your excellent points in the discussion. As from the discussion from the distinguished panelists, we find a couple of important points. For example, the impacts on the wages, self-employment at the rural and urban areas, sectoral impacts such as the rural at the rural non-farm, urban informal sectors, among others. The importance of timely and regular data that has been pointed out in the discussion as well. The issues on reverse migration, limited employment opportunities at the rural economy, and the possible new emerging social anxiety ignited by the reverse migration, unemployment, and the fall in wages. Those are also have been pointed out here. And it has also been mentioned in the discussion by the panelists that the need for more revamped stimulus packages or social safety net packages and further policy deepenings. With this note, now we will go for the open discussion sessions. We have 15 to 20 minutes for the questions, and thereafter another 15 to 20 minutes for the answers from the panelists. You can ask your questions to the panelists in Bangla or English. The panelists also can respond to questions in Bangla or English in this session. Kindly use the raise hand option on Zoom to ask the questions. When I will call upon your name, kindly unmute yourself and speak. You can put your video on while asking the question. You can also ask the question on the Zoom chat box. If you are viewing the program on the Facebook Live, you can ask your question in the comment section of the live stream. We'll read out your questions. While asking the question, please identify yourself and please be very brief. I would request everyone to continue your question or remarks in 1 minute. At the very beginning of the open discussion session, I'd like to request Dr. Krishna Gayan, former DG of BBS and current Senior Research Fellow of Bangladesh Institute of Governance and Management, BIGM. I would humbly request Dr. Krishna Gayan to contain his remarks in 2 minutes. Dr. Krishna Gayan.
Thank you. আমি প্রথমেই keynote স্পিকারকে আমার ধন্যবাদ জানাতে চাচ্ছি। এই সময়ের জন্য গুরুত্বপূর্ণ বিষয়গুলোকে তুলে নিয়ে আসছেন। At the same time, যারা প্যানেলিস্ট চমৎকারভাবে উল্লেখ করেছেন এবং আমি সেলিম রায়হানকেও বিশেষভাবে ধন্যবাদ দিতে চাচ্ছি তিনি যেভাবে সাম আপ করছেন। যেটা আমার কাছে যেটা মনে হয়, আমার যে পরিচয়টা ফার্স্টে বলা হয়েছে ডিডিএস এর, এবং আমরা আলোচনায় যেটা উঠে আসছে যে আমাদের লেবার মার্কেটের আপডেটেড তথ্য আমাদের কাছে নেই। এক্ষেত্রে বিবিএস যেটা করতে পারে যে প্র্যাকটিসটা আমাদের দেশে নেই, কিন্তু বিভিন্ন দেশের ন্যাশনাল স্ট্যাটিস্টিক্যাল অর্গানাইজেশন গুলো যেটা করে এবং এখন করছে কোভিড টাইমে, প্রথাগত যে সিস্টেম সার্ভে বা সেন্সাস করে তথ্য কালেকশন, এটা একটা সময় লাগে, কিন্তু এই সার্ভের মাধ্যমে পরিসংখ্যান পদ্ধতি ফলো করে সেই তথ্যপত্র সংগ্রহ করা যায় সম্ভব। বিভিন্ন দেশ সেটা করছে এবং বাংলাদেশের ক্ষেত্রে বিবিএস এক্ষেত্রে এগিয়ে আসতে পারে। তাহলে যে তথ্যপত্রের জন্য আসলে সরকার কি পলিসি নেবেন বা পাবলিক সেক্টর প্রাইভেট সেক্টর কিভাবে ভাববে, সেটার অনেকটাই সমস্যার সমাধান সম্ভব। দ্বিতীয়ত আমার যেটা মনে হয় যে গ্রামীণ সেক্টর, রুরাল সেক্টর যেটাকে আমরা বলি, সেটাকেও আমাদের অ্যাড্রেস করা দরকার। কারণ আমাদের যে ইনফর্মাল সেক্টরে যারা কাজ করছেন, এবং আমরা যেটা দেখছি প্রতি মুহূর্তেই কিন্তু ঢাকা থেকে বড় বড় শহর থেকে জনগণ ফিরে যাচ্ছে তাদের কর্মসংস্থান নেই বলে, বা যারা মাইগ্রান্টরা ফিরে আসছেন বিভিন্ন দেশ থেকে, তারা কিন্তু গ্রাম বেস। কাজে রুরাল ইকোনমিকে আমাদের ক্রপ সেক্টরকে বাদ দিয়ে, যেটা সেলিম রায়হান অ্যাড্রেস করেন, নন ফার্ম অ্যাক্টিভিটিস, সেটাকে অ্যাড্রেস করতে হবে। অ্যাট দ্য সেম টাইম আমাদের সোশ্যাল সেফটি নেটটা এখানে প্রায়োরিটাইজ করা দরকার, যে কাদেরকে আমরা অ্যাড্রেস করব, এর কাভারেজ কতটা বাড়বে। ধন্যবাদ আমাকে সুযোগ দেওয়ার জন্য।
Thank you, Dr. Kishan, for your remarks. Now I'm going for our questions. So there is one comment from Dr. Nahid Sattar. Dr. Nahid Sattar, you can speak the question, or I can read the comment here. Do you like to speak it up here?
Yes, thank you. Maybe I'll just say the same thing. Thank you very much for inviting me to like ask this question. So I was thinking about the intersectoral transfer of labor, which is also happening due to this crisis, like the manufacturing worker looking for employment in the agricultural sector, or like the restaurant worker selling vegetables and things like that. So, but the thing is, the employment in the sectors that people are maybe trying to go to are also under pressure right now due to this crisis. So it's not that those sectors are pulling people in or like they have opportunity for like employing all of those people. So the point I was trying to make, like the response to this crisis need to take into consideration this factor, this thing that's happening. So in that regard, I highly appreciate the recommendations in the presentation regarding supporting agricultural industrialization, non-crop agriculture, and online market platforms, as those are, I believe, some of the sectors where labor is trying to move to. People are trying to find work in. But there is more research that is required to understand this dynamics, like where labor is moving to. So that's the comment I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sattar, for your brief comment. Now I'm taking questions. There are a couple of questions on the Facebook as well, so I'm reading out them. One question is from Opu Devnath. His question is to Dr. Selim Raihan. What can save our informal sector employment, as most of our people make livelihood on that? Dr. Devnath, Mr. Opu Devnath, he has another question, and the question is, our government is only focusing on large industries, especially RMG sector, by providing monetary stimulation, although we see governments allowing protect our small and medium industries. At the same time, private investment is also falling. My question to Professor Shamsul Alam sir is, what's your suggestions towards government to protect on SME employment as well as our informal sector employment? We have another question from Ms. Sumaya Shima. The question is also to our chair, Dr. Shamsul Alam sir. The question is, the closure of educational institutions is affecting approximately 37 million students across the country, and if it lasts for a longer period, it will engender far-reaching economic and social impacts for COVID. How do you describe it, or take the policy suggestion from here? So there are a couple of other questions in the chat box, so let me check them. There is one comment from Mr. Sheikh Mojibul Haq. Sheikh Mojibul Haq, you can unmute yourself and ask the questions if you want. But limit it in 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Is there my question is there any initiatives taken by the government, that is now the rural urban nexus is going on and people going to rural area, and also in urban skills is going to be changed during the COVID-19 situation? What government has taken the initiative? Is there any initiative taken by the government? This is my question, and there are some comments from my end. I want to add, that is there is a need of research or survey to identify the present need in national both as well as international skills, what skills is needed. And we think there is a platform, some government as well as private needed to work as a matchmaker to make these initiatives, all the entrepreneur or other businessmen, they want to be entrepreneur, but they need a platform, they need a support of loan, they need a institutional support to develop their skills. They need there is a scope of reintegration of the returning migrants, because they have the skills. To use their skills, we need some policies, we need some directions from the government also. And another thing is decentralization of the services is essential and very essential. We have all are in Dhaka, we are talking about the issues in city level, but what about the in district or divisional level. That because the peoples are going to the village, they are want to do something in their village area. What we need then, we have to take initiative for their improvement, for their scope, to create a scope there. So I think there is a strong relationship between the ministries and to concentrate the issues and prepare a single guideline to overcome joblessness during and after the COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mujibul Alam. We have some comments in the chat box. Before I read out that, আমি একটু আপনাদের সবাইকে বলতে চাই, আপনারা যারা প্রশ্ন করতে চান, মিডিয়া থেকে আছেন বা যারা আছেন, আপনারা বাংলাতেও প্রশ্নটা করতে পারেন। আপনারা ফেসবুকে আমাদের জুমে যে রেজ হ্যান্ড অপশনটা আছে, রেজ হ্যান্ড অপশনটা আপনারা যদি ইউজ করেন বা চ্যাট বক্সে যদি লিখেন, আমরা আপনাদেরকে অপশনটি দিব। So those of you who are willing to ask the question, you can use the raise hand option in the Zoom or write your question in the chat box. So there is another comment from Mr. Engineer Rashidul Alam, and his question is to panel. His question is to the panel. His question is how we can provide a decent working environment in agriculture sector for the agriculture workforces, providing portable sanitation facilities, safe drinking water source within the easy reach, hand washing facilities. We observe that due to the lack of decent working environment in the agriculture sector, even our educated family members are reluctant to extend helpful support to their parents in the agriculture activities. So basically, his question is regarding the wash facilities in the agriculture sector, or those who are engaged in the rural sector, and related to the overall working environment there. There is a question from Fahmida Akhtar. The question is, what measures can be taken to give mental support to one entrepreneur to face or take the challenge in the situations? I think only counseling is not that much helpful. So what measures can be taken? I see there is a raise. Mr. Jahidul Islam, he raised his hand. Mr. Jahidul Islam, you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Jahidul Islam. জাহিদুল ইসলাম, আপনি আনমিউট করে প্রশ্নটা করতে পারেন। আপনার রেজ হ্যান্ড অপশনটি আমি দেখতে পাচ্ছি। আপনি কাইন্ডলি আপনার পরিচয়টা দিবেন, তারপর একটু প্রশ্নটা করবেন। জাহিদুল ইসলাম।
জি, আসসালামু আলাইকুম। আমি মোহাম্মদ জাহিদুল ইসলাম, আমি দা বিজনেস স্ট্যান্ডার্ড পত্রিকায় কাজ করি। এখানে কর্মসংস্থানের কথা বলা হচ্ছে। কর্মসংস্থানের মূল একটা হলো প্রাইভেট সেক্টর ইনভেস্টমেন্ট। কিন্তু পাবলিক সেক্টর ইনভেস্টমেন্ট গত কয়েক বছরে ৫-৭ বছরে এটা জিডিপির 4% থেকে বেড়ে এখন 8%। তো আমার প্রশ্ন হলো, এই সরকারি বিনিয়োগের সাথে তাল দিয়ে বেসরকারি বিনিয়োগ বাড়তেছে না কেন, বা এই এমপ্লয়মেন্ট আবার এই গ্রোথের সাথে তাল মিলিয়ে না বেড়ে উল্টো মানে কম রেটে বাড়ছে? তার মানে কি সরকারি বিনিয়োগের কোনো কোয়ালিটিগত কোনো সমস্যা? ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you, Mr. Jahidul Islam. Now we have another question from the Facebook, and the question is, how could we create pandemic sensitive employment? So far, is there anyone else apart from them who want to raise a question? We do not see any other raised hands at this moment, and there are no more questions. So I think we can go to our panelists at this moment for their responses. So first, I would like to, before I go back to the panel, I would like to request Dr. Bidisha for his remarks and his responses. Dr. Bidisha, kindly continue it in 2 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Bidisha.
Perhaps not hard.
Okay.
I think Dr. Bidisha is having again problem. Dr. Bidisha, you are there?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
sorry, I
sure.
missed. Yeah.
So Dr. Bidisha, we have heard the questions from the session. So we are coming back to the panelists. Before we go to the panelists, we come back to you, and if you have any remarks from the panel discussion or from the questions that has come from the panel from the forum. So over to you, Dr. Bidisha.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I think the issue of data that has been very rightly pointed out, and that is something that we have been also facing this issue. And obviously, I would also like to request Professor Shamsul Alam to take some initiative so that during this pandemic we can get some at least some indication and some data of at least some of the key indicators. That would be really very helpful. The secondly is, like, I think there has been some question regarding the absorbing the return migrants, especially the migrants who are going from urban area to the rural area, and for that reason, what we were trying to mention in the presentation is, like, we need to focus on linking the urban consumers to the local level producers who are producing at the local level. And for this, one important issue that has been mentioned by Dr. Nahid Safdar, like, we need to have some platform, and the platform is important, and local level youth, local level government representatives, they can play a very important role. And by far we have seen that local level representatives work quite efficiently when we are talking about, like, food security and maintaining the supply chain. So that has more or less worked quite decently for the last 3-4 months. So that is something, like, when we are talking about absorbing the return migrants, the internal migrants, they are going back to their rural areas, how we can absorb them. Maybe we can think about what we mentioned in the presentation. Maybe we can think about, like, providing them very small scale loan for absorbing them in rural non-farm area, to make some arrangements so that they can have some, they can be engaged with the local level youth to send the local level producers and small and medium enterprise producers things to the urban dwellers. So this type of arrangement that can be made, and that can be made quite efficiently if we engage the people, the government representatives who are at the local level and the local youth. So that is something that I wanted to add.
Thank you, Dr. Bidisha, for your quick remarks. Now we'll go back to our panelists. First, I would like to go to Dr. Ahsan Mansur. If you kindly put on your remarks. Dr. Ahsan Mansur, sir, the mic is yours.
Thank you.
Sir, kindly continue in 2 minutes. So
yeah, sure.
Yeah,
a number of questions raised, as for example, intersectoral employment issue. Generally, we have to be aware that these employments are not something that we really would like to do. Essentially, somebody who had a permanent job, becoming a vendor in the street selling, hawkering things. These are personal, what you call disaster mitigation strategies. These are to cope with the disaster. Essentially, people can do and will do anything and everything in that they can put their hands on just to survive. But that is not what will save the economy. That is not what we would like to see for our citizens doing in future in the post-COVID situation. So we have to really create the employment in where the employment was and where better employments can be created in future. You see, SME employment is the first thing that goes away, and SME employment is the first thing that comes back. It requires less capital, etc. So to create SME employment, government has to focus on the disbursements of SME loans as early as possible. And that's where we are lagging behind. We are still not sitting together, threshing it out in the next 2 to 3 days, instead of putting files to the Ministry of Finance and then back to Bangladesh Bank and then to the commercial banks and then commercial banks to Bangladesh Bank and then to the Ministry of Finance. This is not going to work that way. They need to sit together in one room and thresh it out in the next 2 to 3 days, long sessions, day after day, and thresh it out all, so that there's a decision taken right at the operational level, at where it matters, and then start the disbursements of those lending. Otherwise, this file chalachari will continue forever and there will be no outcome. I would say that in terms of agriculture, wash facilities, etc., the best thing that agriculture can get is the automation, is not the automation, is the mechanization of agriculture. That has brought about changes. People are now harvesting rice. They don't have to cut it in the mud and all that things. Rice is cut, packed, and they can just pick up the sacks to their home. So that's mechanization is the way forward. But for that, we have to be mindful. Agriculture has to shed more labor. And that is the strategy that we have been following. And Bangladesh was going smoothly in that direction until this COVID hits and workers are flowing back to agriculture. That is not a sustainable thing. We would like again that agriculture elasticity will be negative and there will be highly positive elasticity in the non-agricultural sector. And the mechanization will increase the productivity with that negative elasticity with respect to labor to output in agriculture. So that's the way strategy we should follow. Finally, I would say there is nothing called pandemic resistant job in the world. Any job can go depending on the situation, environment, and the domestic demand conditions, etc., etc. What we should have done, the world economy should have done, what leaders should have done, is cooperate. At the time that this infection was breaking out, there was a need for strong collaboration. That was the missing element, and we are all paying for that non-cooperation at the very highest level. Yeah, China, US, adversarial relationship, blaming each other is not going to help in this situation. There will be more of these things. We already in this century, in the 20 years, we have seen bird flu, we have seen avian flu, we have seen SARS, we have seen many other swine flu, and also bubonic flu is now plague, is now in some parts of China. So things will come in future as well, either from Africa or from China or from America or from Bangladesh, who knows? We can never predict those things, but we have to, the global community has to work together to contain it where it starts, even at the origin, and forcefully put that fire off. So that's what is needed. We cannot create pandemic resistant jobs ever. We don't need to do that. We need to contain the pandemic itself in future. And that's where we failed miserably, and we are paying the price dearly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to go to Dr. Imran Matin. Dr. Matin, your quick responses from the floor.
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick. So I think there's only one point that I want to raise. I think this is with respect to the data part, which again, I want to re-emphasize in the context of the labor and employment body or commission or group, whatever, has been proposed by Selim. Now, I think it's really, really important that we set up anything around data in a not in the traditional way we think about data, which is kind of only service and led by government. I think we really need to be far more innovative here. We need to be thinking more in terms of an ecosystem. There are lots of other operators, non-state actors. I mean, SANEM itself, which is a hybrid. I mean, university entrepreneurs coming and setting up, something like PRI is there, VIGD, a university-based but a non-state, player. The IDS is there. So I think a whole ecosystem thinking is really needed if we really want to move forward in this data. And BBS, of course, is to play the central role, but I think the roles and responsibilities to be thought through, the governance structure needs to be thought through. There's clear advantages BBS has, but there's also an ecosystem that BBS needs to draw on if it really wants to move up to the 21st century challenges and the kind of challenges that I think Ahsan Bhai has sort of spoken about. And also bring in, government innovation, such as the union digital centers, that exist at the sort of union level. How do we bring those parties in as well in the whole data, kind of revolution that we basically want to create, so that we can actually have the kind of data and all work on a systematic platform. and contribute to their systematic platform. So I think we should be thinking about a data platform in an ecosystem kind of a way, so that we can really be fit for the future in terms of our analysis and analytical work we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matin, for your remarks. Now I'd like to request Dr. Selim Raihan, sir, for responses to the questions coming from the floor. Sir.
Thank you. I'll be very brief too. I fully endorse what Dr. Imran Matin talked about the data issue. I think that kind of ecosystem is extremely important, and definitely the Bangladesh Board of Statistics should play the central role. And I also request Dr. Shamsul Alam, being at the center of many leading initiatives of the government, 5-year plans, SDGs, and related other things. I think his role and his division's role is extremely important. My final point is on the informal sector, especially I saw one question about the informal sector employment, and I related to the micro, small, and medium enterprises. And we have seen that though there were 20,000 crore taka were allocated for as a stimulus package for MSMEs, but the success so far is extremely low. And we know that the formal channels, the banking sector doesn't really help them. So what would be the alternative mechanism? How do we really reach out to these affected small and medium enterprises? My just humble suggestion would be that, can we use the microfinance institution mechanism? Is there any way? Because they have an outreach of actually financing small and medium enterprises through microcredits. Is it possible that the GO-NGO collaboration can actually help to solve this problem, which is kind of long-standing, and we know that the small and medium enterprises, they suffer quite a lot in access to finance. I'll stop here, Mahtab. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So before we listen from our special guest and the chair of the session, there are two more questions that we have from a chat box here. So I would read them out. Dr. Bidisha, if you may respond to the questions in a minute or so. The first question is from Mohammed Taki, and the question is: the recent digital divide among students for internet access may cause some of our private university peers to graduate earlier, perhaps when the economy recovers, and we may still be behind in our graduation who are studying in the public universities. Will it in any way affect our prospects in the job market for those who will graduate later? Another question is from Fahmida Akhtar, and her question is: we can see the government job holders enjoy high scale salary payment, and it doubles in every 5 years. Wage pattern should be revised, but will it be justified to reduce the current scale or remaining in this same scale for a long time? So those are the two questions in my hand now. Dr. Bidisha, if you can quickly respond to those questions. Dr. Bidisha.
Okay. Thank you. The first question is about education and employment. I would like to add that there should be like two-way or two avenues to resolve the problem. One, I know that there are a lot of students who want to pursue career in as a BCS cadre and BCS government officers. So for these cases, the government must reconsider about the time frame of the examination and all of these issues. And also the thing is like there can be some sort of indication or instruction for the government, so that due to this pandemic, no special segment of the students are suffered. So that is one thing the government can take the initiative. But I think the more important thing is like the education institutions that should think about in collaboration with the UGC and Ministry of Education to revise and to rethink about the curriculum, rethink about the length of the semester and all of these things, because now this is an extraordinary situation. So we have to also think about it in an extraordinary way. So the most important thing is like the UGC, the educational institutes, the Ministry of Education, they should sit together, and the different departments of the universities, of the higher education institutes, they should also think about revising the syllabus to make some arrangements. For example, we can have classes during Friday, Saturday. We can have extra additional classes. So by this, we will have to try to minimize the losses that the students losses in terms of the timing. And another thing I would just like to point out that from the UGC and the Education Institute, we should think about providing an education loan, which is very important. And I have seen that some of the universities have also thought about and started to provide some special allowances to the student for internet packages. This is also something that some of the universities like Dhaka University and other public universities should start thinking, so that in a small scale loan that may be very helpful for the students who are actually in a very hardship, who are going through a very hardship. The second point of regarding the government job, that is something like, I think one related issue, both of the questions are very related, is like we need to highlight about the problem of the skill mismatch. There is a mismatch between the education institute and there's a mismatch between the type of job that is in demand. So the industry, the service sector. So we need to bring these two entities together, and that is something that is very much lacking in the context of Bangladesh. And that is something, one of the reasons we are finding that there are unemployed educated youths, they are in the market. So that is something I think the Education Institute and the private sector, they should work together, and the Ministry of Education can provide some incentives or provide some insight to help them to bring together, so that this skill mismatch problem that can be resolved. Because if we can resolve the skill mismatch problem, the problem of unemployment and problem of insecurity in the job, that can be resolved to some extent, and that will encourage the people to come more to the private sector, and that will reduce the burden that is on the government sector as well. And I would also like to add one point. I think reducing the salary may be a little bit too much of a step ahead, but we have, from SANEM, we have always talked about austerity measures, and austerity measures in terms of cutting down the expenditure of the bonus, training, and all of these things, at least in this pandemic situation. So, and to use that money spent for employment generation and education program in the private sector.
Thank you so much, madam. Now, having heard from the panelists and the floor, we will hear from our special guest and the chair of the session. Many of the comments and questions were directed to them. So our special guest and honorable chair, you may respond to the questions. Those came from the floor along with your overall observations. First, I would like to request our special guest of the session, Mr. Tuomo Poutiainen, the country director of ILO, to provide his remarks. I humbly request Mr. Tuomo to provide his remarks in around 12 to 14 minutes. Mr. Tuomo, the mic is yours.
Thank you, and it's a lot. I don't know where to even start. It's an extremely vivid and thought-provoking discussion, and I'm very happy to see Professor Shamsul Alam and all the sort of specialists in this area, Dr. Sayema and others, and it's extremely sort of a timely time to think of this. It is really all about jobs and employment, and it's really all about safe work from an ILO perspective. And I think you all share that thought that this is an extremely difficult time. And some of the fundamental labor market issues that we all know have been there for a while have come into a very sharp focus because of this COVID-19 situation. So I'll reflect on some of the things that have been said, and I think I will not go into any of the reflections on the analysis of the situation. I think we all share that, right? And I'll focus on some of what might be useful to do. And I think one of the key things is, and it was alluded to, that there is a tremendous need for government and private sector to come together and to think about positive labor market programs which would allow for people to go back to work when the situation so allows, right? And in the ILO language, we talk about public employment programs, and we talk about the role that particularly the various infrastructure programs, rural and urban, have and can have in terms of creating employment. And there, of course, there's a big role of in terms of public procurement. You know, a lot of contracts are out there where which can be repurposed to use labor-intensive methods and tools so that more people can go back to work and work can be shared. So there are certain policies that government together with private sector can think of going forward. And it goes also in terms of what was alluded to by one of you, the job guarantee schemes. It is possible also to think a mix of apprenticeship systems and link stimulus packages to apprenticeship systems and public work programs, right? So that the stimulus is not only stimulus for liquidity, it's also for stimulus for jobs, because it's tied to requests and conditionalities to create employment, at least for a certain temporary time, 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, whatever it requires to bring Bangladesh back to work. So I think that's quite important discussion to have. We very much share, and it's not only the ILO but the UN system, because we work together very much with FAO and IFAD and World Food Programme, the need to really invest in micro and small and medium enterprises, and particularly in relation to rural economy. There's almost a need for a specific local economic development sort of programs, which takes upon that message of decentralization and bringing the money to the local level and helping the local supply chains to connect and put emphasis on SMEs and micro and self-employment, so that can activate more people to the labor market and also boost economy from that perspective. So the micro and small and enterprise investment is hugely important going forward. And the same would have to be there also for export industries, and not the export industries only because of their own employment capacity, but also because there's so much feeder industries. So many of the SMEs in the industrial areas, the smaller ones, feed the bigger ones, right? And they are hurting massively. And because of that, it's also important to work together to activate and provide stimulus packages and employment schemes for those industries, because they are the backbone of the exports when they recover, right? And so that's something to also think of. And now I move a little bit to one thing that was referenced, the data and the labor data. We share, of course, the challenge that the old style labor force surveys may not cover the current needs of today, and there is perhaps a need to have a new look at how labor market information is generated, and find some type of a hybrid. And I think Mr. Imran was talking about this, to look into, to create a labor market information system that has continuity, that has regularity, that does not look only at formal employment, but also establishments, and particularly SMEs, and is also able to cover the informal work. And there is actually an attempt to do this through something called Future of Work Lab, that ILO, UNDP, the Planning Commission, A2I, and others, we're actually working actively, because the government is very aware of the fact that something needs to be changed. And the ITC ministry is also part of this. So there is an attempt to come up with a new ecosystem for labor market information that would be actionable, that is linked to job matching and job placement. You know, this used to be in the old time called employment services, right? And typically they used to be government built employment services. But perhaps the time for such, let's say, administrative and stiff systems is no more, And maybe there is a need to develop a new kind of a hybrid system where the public sector and the private sector work together, and particularly the private sector, because that's where the jobs are, right? They know where they're going, and the skills and the skilling and the job placement needs to match, that requirement. So I think there is some thinking around this, and I think now more than ever, it is important to really get it done and focus on it and invest in it together. I very much like the idea of having some sort of employment committee or commission. I mean, there was already before the COVID-19 came, for the purposes of the fifth 8-year plan, there was an attempt to come up with a job strategy. And some of those findings, recommendations have made their way forward. But as long as there is that kind of interministerial and private sector linked capacity to dialogue, what are the kind of affirmative policies and programs that are needed, I think the job may get done through that way as well. And the UN system will be very happy to continue to support that. As you know, we are developing a joint collective socioeconomic recovery framework that is intended then to help the government in any way it needs to work on these issues. So their data and evidence is extremely important. Employment, SMEs is extremely important. And so is migration, and whatever can be done to facilitate the current prospect, the unfortunate prospect of having a lot of return migrants arrive. So there's also specific attempt with IOM, ILO, Minister of Expatriate and Foreign Affairs to work on a reintegration strategy, which is not only backed on reintegration, but on reskilling and backwards migration when and if the destination country labor markets may come to open up. And lastly, maybe, I mean, there's many things, but I know that time is of essence. Lastly, I think skilling and the continuing quest to modernize skills and TVET is of essence. And just a couple of days ago, there was the World Youth Skill Day, and there was a big WebEx as well, where Ministry of Education, NSDA, and many other government agencies, actually the totality of the secretaries who are involved in skills development were present. And there was a very important discussion on how to move to modernize skills and TVET and how to make it market responsive. Because last year we were talking about future of work, and now we are talking about COVID, but the fundamentals are still there. It is so important to continue to invest in the agility of the TVET and skills institutions to produce the right kind of labor market entrance with the right skills level and with the right kind of aptitudes. So that investment needs to continue to be there. And I think this COVID-19 situation sort of puts a high focus on these fundamentals. There has to be job strategy and employment policy. Without that, it's hard to create jobs in a focused manner, right? Because jobs don't just come. You have to somehow have a policies and programs that facilitate that. That has to be based on active labor market information that is actionable. Not something that comes from years, but is actionable on the go. And we have to continue to build the skills and TVET systems together with the private sector so that all levels, be it rural, be it focused on higher skills, be it focused on future potential needs, all of those elements are served, because not all work will be, upskilled or high skilled. In the meantime, there has to continue to be a real focus on all labor and all levels of employment. So I leave it at that, and I'll continue to listen carefully how we can be of help and assistance, not only ILO, but the whole system in Bangladesh. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuomo, for your excellent remarks. Discussion, you rightly pointed out the depth and severity of the crisis and the importance of policy depending from the government to come out of the crisis. We talked on several issues, including the future of work, skill mismatches, upskilling of the workers, investment in the human capital, then enhancing the labor market information system, etc. Now I would like to request our honorable chair of the session, Professor Shamsul Alam, member, Senior Secretary, General Economics Division, Planning Commission, Bangladesh. Professor Shamsul Alam, the floor is yours. I would humbly request you to provide your remarks in around 12 to 15 minutes. Professor Alam, over to you.
Not so big, that was needed. Okay, thank you, Mahtab, very much, and quite enlightening, enlightened discussion we have had this morning, and really enjoyed quite. I thank Bidisha for giving us a very succinct analytical paper, Dr. Ahsan Mansur, Imran Matin, and Dr. Selim Raihan, and particularly our special guest, Tuomo, and many participated in the discussion also. That really was quite enjoying, I should say. I have a few comments on the whole gamut of the discussion. Firstly, to Dr. Bidisha, my understanding is it's surely an aggregate study, no doubt. But if we could have some reflections sectorally, sectoral issues came up in this discussion too, because we have defined elasticities of growth, elasticities of employment for different sectors, particularly agriculture, though negative. We have quite big positive employment elasticity in the services sector, 0.55, and 0.39 in the industrial sector. So certainly COVID fallout will be different on different sectors. And for policy purposes, if we have sectoral reflection, then it could be better to have policy actions by sectors. So in future, maybe you can think of that also. And another comment I should say, you have built 4 scenarios and all these things. All we are talking all this because of COVID fallout. So it has a direct link to COVID infestation situation. You all know R0, which says that how one infected person infects how many people. That's R0. So if R0 is less than 1, so situation would be different, and its impact on employment will be different. If R is 1, if 1 actually infects 1, so it is 1. If one person infects more than 1 person, so R0 to be more than 1. So actually, where we are, we don't know. It's a very technical question. I don't know who can answer, and particularly our economists could also estimate with the figures given by our health ministries. Actually, where are we with R0, if I say? So all these discussions actually hinges on where actually we are and when we will be coming out of this COVID infestation. Many things, of course, it depends on that. So if scenario could also be built, by assessing this R0 situation, could be more relevant, could be more empirical, I think, and could be more taking lessons of that situation. So I don't know in future work or in future day whether you can relate this R0 situation and with your scenario building and corresponding fallout in employment. Dr. Bidisha, you just said one thing in your presentation. Interest rate is high for micro and small enterprises. If we consider that transaction cost is quite high for micro and small enterprises, even then providing subsidy, we could make it reduced. But the question is why it is needed. I mean, if we think of high transaction cost, when prices are still for some products they produce is high now, and prices has not fallen at least. So keeping the market prices in a normal situation, what we have, prices are a bit relatively high for some of the products they produce. So in that situation, why you need to reduce interest rate further? They are facing interest rate 4.5%, other 5.5% is being provided by the government as subsidy. So, I mean, should this be a big concern right now for stimulating the small and micro enterprises? The more is actually providing the services in the packages as designed by the government to make them more access. That is more important right now, rather than interest rate. It is not. It will not be an hindrance. No, it will be not a hindrance to them with this interest rate, I think. Better educated labor force needed, of course, is we say this always, but mind that our labor productivity has risen over the whole 7 5-year plan period. If I say has risen in the rural areas, it has risen as 6.6 something, or in urban areas, real wages increased. Even productivity increased at 7.7%, I mean, per level. So it has occurred because labor productivity has risen, because labor efficiency, though we have mismatch, we know all, still things are coming up. You all know. In 2009, we had 1% enrollment in the TVET education, which has come up now to more than 16% in 2018-19. And so it's coming up anyway. I again go back to the point on sectoral discussions, why you need to know it. You know, agriculture is no more the biggest employer in the economy. In fiscal year 2018-19, the biggest employment, the largest employment provided by services sector of the total employment, 43.2%. Agriculture sector provides only 35.2%, and industrial sector 21.6%. Meaning actually composition of the employment, structural changes have taken place there. So if we could get sectoral implications on this COVID fallout, certainly that could have been more useful. I repeat it again. And about you said, Bidisha monitoring evaluation of incentive packages is very much needed. I quite agree. This is a big take for me. I mean, as a policy planner, certainly we should have very useful monitoring evaluation system to make the packages useful. So that is very much needed, and this is a big I should take for the policymakers, and those who will be implementing those, certainly they would look into this. Lastly, I want to say one thing about the data requirement. I mean, it's not a denying fact, we need data, timely data. We suffer very much with the data situation, you all know. In many areas, we have lack data. So it's very difficult to have current analysis of policy issues with lack data. So that is very much needed, but I also quite agree with Imran Matin that certainly BBS will play its own role, but as researchers, research institution, we have also a big role in generating information, in generating data, particularly, Imran Matin already referred those BIGD, BIDS, your SANEM, and all this certainly can help also generate many information, many data. Of course, those will be cross-sectional, will be survey data, one-time data, all this. But for time series, certainly BBS has to play a big role. And Dr. Selim Raihan also suggested we need to go with enlarged deficit budget. I fully agree with that. I mean, suddenly, though in the budget we had 6% deficit as of announcement, certainly at the end of year it will go up. Obviously, I mean, nothing to worry about that. We would go with more deficit financing, obviously with that. And Dr. Bozlo Khandokar said fiscal responses. He actually directed a question to me also, that what about fiscal responses? We have monetary responses, monetary measures in our packages. Of course, there is fiscal amount also with budgetary supports and all this. Fiscal responses depends, Bozlo Khandokar know very well. We are highly constrained by the low GDP, low revenue GDP ratio. India, as you refer to, as they claim, they are spending 10% of their GDP for incentive packages. We could not go more than 3.7%. The biggest and stumbling block is our low GDP ratio, revenue GDP ratio, you all know. But the good thing is, of course, we need a lot of reforms in the revenue sector. BET automation is deepened and going to be expanded very rapidly now. That's a good thing, good news. They are going with automation very much from last couple of months, and in future it will be intensified. Automation, that will help, perhaps that will help a lot, though we'll have lower personal income this year, obviously, because of low corporate taxes, low personal income for the bigger section of the population. So I think, and someone also told me about the education, some question from the floor. How about educational institution, what government is thinking? Most of the education institutions, public education institutions are closed now. There's a big worry also. You all know this is a very sensitive issue also. When government went with, humane lockdown, I mean, with lockdown in special lockdown and having economic activities allowed to go with, many actually criticized heavily initially in the April that government should lock down everywhere, government should go with hard lockdown. But still, I think, as Dr. Imran Matin said, 70% of the people is happy with that kind of decision, because our situation could be more grave if we stop everything with hard lockdown. So what I am saying is very much sensitive issue, because they are all are young and small children. So opening schools, that may create hue and cry. But still, we cannot put the young generation in lockdown, full lockdown. That should not be continued for long. We cannot lose one generation, So certainly, I hope after Eid you will have some announcement on the educational opening of educational institutions. So that is very much in the government mind. Government always, feel pains on that, but you also understand the sensitivity of the issue. So thank you very much for asking this and other questions to me. And I again say it's a very useful and timely arrangement by SANEM, and very many good suggestions we received, many takeaways for us also as a policy planner, and as a researcher, many of you also will get new ideas and thoughts from this discussion. I thank SANEM again, thank the paper presenter and our enlightened, our very learned panelists, and participants also in the discussion, and those who listen. And media also participated. I saw Gaji television channel while listening. So thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Selim Raihan and others who organized this session. Have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, for your excellent remarks on the discussions. We are almost to the end of our today's session. May I request Professor Selim Raihan, sir, for any last remarks, sir?
I just want to thank all of you. I think it was an excellent discussion, and we will prepare a summary of this discussion and we'll share with you. And I really like to see Professor Shamsul Alam actually taking this agenda forward. And we are with you. We are with you to support in any other form. And I can see Dr. Imran Matin, he put a comment. I fully endorse his view that GED can actually take the lead role in putting us together. So I think this is something we really expect from you. I just want to at the end,
thank you.
Just want to update you that from SANEM, since April, we have been actually conducting several programs like this. One program is called SANEM Netizen Forum. Until now, we have conducted 8 episodes. So that means more than 2 episodes per month. where many stakeholders actually involved, and they talked on the current issues, current affairs. And this SANEM Shongzog, this is today we had this on labor market, but we also had sessions on agriculture, on youth, on education, on health. Also, we had sessions on other current affairs. So, in the next week, we are going to have one more session on youth budget framework on 25th. And as I mentioned, on 8th August, we're going to have one webinar on business confidence index. So I invite you all. And again, I thank you for giving us your very valuable time. I must thank the special guest as well. Tuomo, thank you so much. And your support is well needed. You know, we appreciate your support and your enthusiasm. So with this, I would like to conclude here. I stop the live stream. And then, yes, the session is not live now. So thank you, everyone. Imran Bhai, Sir, Ahsan Sir, and Tuomo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Shamsul Alam.